Doctors of Reddit, have you ever been in a public place and someone shouted, "Is anyone here a doctor?" or something along those lines? What happened? This isn't the same thing, but several years ago I was at a med school graduation and the woman announcing the names fainted. When it was clear she was fine, one of the other faculty members asked on the microphone, "Is there a doctor in the house?" and got some big laughs. Was at my stepson's baseball game. 13 years old kids. Infielder takes a line drive to the face and drops to the ground. Our coach yells, "Mike, come quick." Other team's coach yells, "Mike, we need you." Two dads sprint onto the field, one from each dugout entrance. Both arrive to the player at the same time and look up at each other and realize they both know each other. Both are orthopedic surgeons named Mike. My Phil, who is a doctor, had a heart attack while eating dinner with a friend who is also a doctor. They both recognized what was happening and rushed into the car rather than wait on the ambulance. He drove him at high speed to the very close hospital where my Phil flatlined right after arriving. They got him back, but if he had waited at the restaurant he would have most likely died due to the amount of time it would have took for the ambulance to get there. I was having dinner at a fancy restaurant when a guest at the next table had a seizure and collapsed to the floor. As it happens, I was having dinner with two orthopedic surgeons, who both got up to help. They were soon relieved by a neurologist and an emergency medicine specialist who took care of the poor guy. He seemed to recover quickly and was probably fine. LPT, if you're going to have a seizure in a restaurant, try to do it close to a National Medical Association conference. On a late night flight, around 4 AM or so, lights out, dead silent. Out of nowhere a lady starts yelling, "He's not breathing. He's not breathing." The guy on my window seat comes out of a dead sleep, leaps up and climbs over me before I even knew what was going on and ran back to the man. A few minutes later I could feel the plane accelerate a little and the captain came on and said that LAX had cleared a path for us to land directly without delay. The guy was okay apparently because he was on my connecting flight to Denver. My toddler had a seizure in an airport and stopped breathing, and I screamed for a doctor. I was answered first by a military EMT, then a doctor, several nurses, and finally a pediatrician. They got her breathing again and saved her life before the paramedics got there. The first doctor wouldn't let anyone near her unless they told him their medical credentials. The pediatrician was wearing the emptied out, handed off to her husband, carrier for her own baby the entire time. They were all so kind and reassuring to me at my most terrifying moment. Not a doctor, but I broke my right radius playing soccer when I was 12. When I was down, a man who I'd never seen before had followed my mom after she came over. Turns out the dude was a doctor and his kid was on the opposing team. I didn't learn this till after the fact cause I was in hella pain. But the dude identified himself as a doctor to my mom and informed her that I had broken a bone and he told her it needed to be set. Fate be damned. This man set my arm on the side of the pitch and between a notebook splint tied together with socks. This happened out of town, so I get to the ER the next day, and after the Rays came back, they informed my mom that my arm had been set perfectly and if we hadn't told them my arm was broken they would have had a hard time knowing at all. TLDR, random man sets my broken wrist perfectly on the side of a soccer pitch. Edit. This really took off. Can't wait to show my mom. Gonna screen cap it and put it on the fridge. One time I was at Costco with my aunt, who is an RN, and she helped deliver a baby in the bathroom. It was wild. My aunt was in that situation. Someone on her long distance flight was about to give birth, and she got to move up to first class to deliver the baby. I once saw a car accident happen and a woman in scrubs on a scooter pulled a U-turn, dumped the scooter in the ditch, pulled gloves out of her pocket and ran to the cars, all in one smooth motion. I swear to God I could see the cape flapping behind her and hear the swell of epic music. My sister was on an airplane as a newly minted doctor, like out of school for less than 3 months, when there was a medical emergency and the flight attendants asked for medical professions. She got up, and an older, 60s, man, and she felt relieved because he could take the lead. Turns out he was a cosmetic dermatologist and hadn't done first aid in decades. So she actually had to do the initial exam and workup. Turns out the guy who they were treating was just nauseous and hungover and being dramatic about it. I was on a flight with my grandparents when the flight attendant got on the speakers and asked for any medical professionals to go to the back of the plane. Granddad was a surgeon, so that included him. There was a lady who was very pale and had passed out on the flight. Turns out that she had a phobia of flying and took some anti-anxiety medication before the flight. She also took a calming blend of tea from some holistic shop, and that had a bad reaction with the meds she took and made her blood pressure plummet, causing her to pass out. They got her stabilized, read lots and lots of water, and she went to the hospital after the flight. Don't mix meds and holistic remedies, guys. We were on Main Street in Disney World around closing time. A man in his 30s or 40s was walking around as if drunk, staring at the lights on the tops of the buildings. He bumped into a photographer about to take our picture and my wife, a nurse, said, "Oh he's about to seize." Sure enough, about 5 seconds later he slowly falls down and starts convulsing. I quickly grabbed a blanket our daughters were using in the stroller and put it under his head so he wouldn't knock himself out. My wife cleared the area and called the shots. Disney's response time was absolutely horrid. She had to scream for a worker to go find a need, and it wasn't until she yelled at about the third or fourth worker before she found one who even knew what it was. It took about 10 minutes before the on-site medical team finally showed up. For a company that is otherwise run like a well-oiled machine, their emergency responders left a lot to be desired. Obligatory not a doctor, but our story. Not a doctor, but was on a plane next to a guy who was really nice and kept trying to chat. This was during the peak of my anxiety struggles and I had a plan in place to focus on playing Mario Kart the entire trip, so I was kind of brushing him off. All the while internally my panic was starting to set in. I don't know what I did to make it obvious I was about to flip, but he was like, "Calm down, I'm a doctor. You just need to breathe." And got me ice and kept talking to me to keep me calm and distracted. He was extremely kind in that the entire 4 hours ride he was very attuned to making me feel better. Towards the end of the flight he's like, "Yo, every flight I go on I have to do my doctorly duties with someone, so it's alright." And as if on cue the stewardesses respond to commotion in the back of the plane and asked for a doctor. He smiled at me knowingly and then went to help the guy in the back who apparently was having heart palpitations. He ended up being okay. But man, I was so astounded by his niceness that on the flight home I was just reassured that even if I'm struggling there will be someone to help. And I hope that if I'm ever needed I can help too. Lewis Spears went to an anti-vax rally and asked people if there were any doctors there. Spoiler, there weren't any. Edit. Still waiting for it to happen. I've got a PhD. And I'm convinced I can save lives by explaining Bourdieu and Foucault to dying people. My sister's boyfriend had to do first aid outside a cafe once. The lady made it to the hospital thanks in part to him, but she didn't make it out again. My father-in-law is a doctor. On 2 occasions in church I have seen him help a little old lady who collapsed from heat stroke. He says it's happened 5 times. All were fine. The pastor literally didn't even stop his homily as the woman was carried out to the hallway for my Phil to look at her. My takeaway is that the church needs to install a ducking AC. A friend of mine's dad is an EMT for the fire department and he once was on his hands-free in the car to my friend who was in the car too, so I could hear everything. He was crossing a motorway bridge when I hear him sigh. My friend asks what's wrong. He says, "I'm gonna be late for work," then hangs up. We presumed he was after hitting traffic. He gets home, I'm still in my friend's house, and he explains that there was a car crash on the motorway below him, so he stopped and ran down a slipway to the lady out of the car and organized the emergency services. Planes count? Happened on back-to-back flights to my wife. She thought the first lady would be okay with some fluids on the ground, wasn't able to administer them on the flight, but the lady on the second flight needed an ICU. My wife stabilized her the best she could. But there's only so much you can do on a plane. Thankfully she had taken a course the prior year specifically about in-flight emergencies, so she knew the hard limits of what can be done on a commercial flight. Also, literally no one thanked her, neither flight crew or paramedics on the ground. Hell, the paramedics didn't even want to hear vitals. Ducking United. On a Turkish Airlines flight to Istanbul, Just after leaving American airspace, the pilot asks if anyone is a doctor and if they are to inform the stewardess, and the guy next to me gets up and says he's an ER doctor. Maybe 2 hours after that, the guy's still gone. They turn on all the lights and inform us that we're making an emergency landing in Iceland. Apparently, this man sitting one section in front of us was having muscle spasms in his throat and cutting off oxygen supply. He'd pass out and his throat would relax, and then he'd wake up, and the cycle would repeat. The doctor took one look and said, "You need to get him to a hospital or he'll suffocate to death." The thing that sucked the most was waiting for 4 hours on a tarmac and not being able to move, and listening to a bunch of arseholes complain about it to stewardesses like it was their or anyone's fault. Very first time, it was at my cousin's wedding. The patient was his bride, so that was an interesting way to meet the new member of the family. Turns out she was just dehydrated hypoglycemic from not eating all day. Witnessed a man hit by a motorcycle. A woman comes rushing out of traffic who was a nurse on her way home from the trauma ER close by. She asked me, a complete stranger, to go get her car and purse so she wasn't carjacked because she left it running in the middle of the road. My mom was. A man started seizing. She and another doctor friend happened to be walking by and jumped in to help. A crowd gathered which hurled verbal abuse at them, called them stupid, criticized their technique, and someone even got physical with them. These days, my mother doesn't answer if anyone shouts for a doctor. My dad is an ER doctor. We were on vacation in the Dominican Republic at a resort, and one evening the show was a circus show by the pool. There was a part where a clown on a unicycle was supposed to fall and land in the pool, except the guy fell the wrong way, cracking his skull against the concrete around the pool. Without hesitation, Dad went over and helped the guy until local help could arrive. There was also a time where a kid broke his arm at an open house for our elementary school. Dad made a splint out of a ruler till the kid could get to the ER. No joke. Dad received a bill from the state of California for the cost of the ruler. At a high school basketball game, kid jumps in the air for a rebound and comes down awkwardly on his ankle. He is immediately in pain and his ankle is obviously broken, evident from the unnatural angle his foot is positioned in. The trainer and coaching staff rushed out and helped him, and over the PA speaker someone asked, "If there is a DR in the house, please report to the floor." I'll never forget two things. 1. The way it looked when they threw a towel over his leg. It was like an erection sticking straight up in the air. 2. The sound of a hushed crowd. That sounds weird, but when there's 700 or so people stoic and quiet, there's a sound. At Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, a teenager collapsed and his girlfriend ran to call 911. One middle-aged onlooker was screaming this. Okay, I was an army medic. I assume it is dehydration or something similar. He is very confused and obviously drunk. Probably dehydrated. But he is conscious and is breathing and has a pulse. Got him some shade and a drink of water. My work here is done. This lady starts yelling, "Are you a doctor?" Like a foot from my face. I say no. But he is just dehydrated. 911 was called. Things will be okay. She then runs down the boardwalk calling for a doctor. I stayed with the kid until the ambulance got there. That lady never returned with real medical attention. Not a doctor, but I used to be a volunteer EMT and did some combat medic. I also keep an updated CPR qualification. Both times it was at a pool, not the same pool, and someone started screaming when I was at his buddy's house and was in earshot of the pool. We ran over, and someone had been found in the jacuzzi face down. The guy was dead. CPR isn't going to bring someone back from death though. The second time some kid busted his head jumping into the pool and slipping and hitting the edge. I ran inside, grabbed the first aid kit, had someone call 911. I'm in the US, and I bandaged the wound until the EMTs could arrive. Talked to the kid, making sure he wasn't having problems communicating. Also, it helps keep him calm. This isn't about being a doctor, and I'm not actually a marine biologist, but someone yelled out, "Is anyone a marine biologist?" one time, and, welp, the ocean was angry that day, my friends. Ash Wednesday in church at lunchtime getting ashes. Old guy 3 rows ahead of me went into cardiac arrest and collapsed on his pew. Priest stopped mass for a minute until we got him stabilized and then continued. Priest was still saying mass when the EMTs picked up the patient. Patient made it. Several times on flights. Dizziness. Shortness of breath. Vomiting. Once a guy had a seizure at the gate of a flight I was walking past. Often there was another doc with an actual emergency medicine type background. ER doc. Internist. Anesthesiologist. So I did not have to do anything. Surgeon. Living in Boston almost guarantees there is another doc around when I'm flying lol. I'm a sailplane pilot. One day years ago, a member of my club was soaring over Colorado and ran into a common problem. Not enough thermal lift to make it back to the airport, so he landed on a golf course in Colorado Springs. A man came running up and panted, "I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor." Whereupon Jim opened a canopy, stepped out and said, "That's nice. I'm in real estate." I was at the movies with my friend when I was in high school. We were 15 I believe. I had a seizure early on in the film. I threw my drink and popcorn in the air onto the seats behind me. Now this was in a very small town during the day, so including myself and my friend there were a total of 6 people seeing that film. There was a doctor and a nurse in the audience who came to help me. They stayed with me the whole time and followed up with me after I got back home. That Christmas I sent them a bunch of movie tickets to thank them. My aunt, mom's sister, was out for breakfast one morning when she heard a commotion outside. Being a nurse, she ran outside to see if there was anything she could do. Turns out a lady was hit by a car while crossing the street. As they waited for the EMT to arrive, she started to do everything she could to save this lady. After the lady was taken to the hospital and my aunt started to make sense of everything, she realized that the lady she was trying to save was actually my dad's sister, so my other aunt. She did not survive. However, there is no doubt in my mind that she didn't do everything in her power to try and save her. Airplane to Vegas. Woman had a blood sugar issue according to the flight attendant afterward. I just told her I was very happy to see their professionalism at work in a crisis. The doc and crew got the woman stable and we were given priority to Vegas. The pilot basically floored it, which got us into Las Vegas way early. Early enough to get into Hash House a go-go with a reservation. A bit after we ordered, 2 ladies are standing there screaming, "Great, happy Mother's Day," except they were shaking a small kid upside down. I got up and moved closer. Little girl was turning colors she shouldn't and not doing well. So I reached in and took her away. Felt for sternum and pulled. No luck. So I lifted hard and she was soon screaming for mama. So, the need for a doctor on a flight saved the little girl several hours later. Mother's Day 2012. And free breakfast. Little girl last seen eating a giant strawberry when I stopped by to thank her parents for paying our bill. She was not a fan of mine and I am okay with that. I'm a doctor of plants. Are you a plant? No. Sorry, I can't stop your bleeding. Have you tried a tourniquet? I guess. Not a doctor, but I was traveling with a woman who was a doctor. An elderly man had a stroke on a plane from Mexico to Atlanta. They asked for a doctor on the intercom. She went. He was unresponsive, but had breath and a heartbeat. They took a hard right to Sarasota and got him off to the ER. May I brag on my spouse? He was walking in the neighborhood and came upon a car accident. My spouse is a doctor. The accident wasn't serious, but the passenger was unresponsive. My spouse realized that the passenger was overdosing on opiates and told the police that the passenger needed Narcan. The cops said they'd been trained to administer Narcan, but didn't have any. When the EMTs arrived, my spouse requested Narcan for the passenger, and they were able to bring him back to responsiveness. He may have been okay anyway, but my spouse may have saved his life.